Welcome to the Prevent the Preventable podcast, where quite simply, we're on a mission to help you live longer by preventing health complications before they start. Every year, there are millions of cases of brain hemorrhage, but there really doesn't have to be. And at the Natalie Kate Moss Trust, we're committed to ensuring that those that don't have to happen don't. In this podcast, you will learn more about brain hemorrhages, their causes, how to prevent them, and so much more. Expect honest, straightforward conversations that will give you the information you need to take back control of your own health and potentially prevent the preventable. On today's episode of the Prevent the Preventable podcast, we have Dr. David Lee. Now, Dave is a clinical director at the company Sleep Unlimited, who ultimately aim to improve the sleep of those people who are struggling with their sleep. And we will hear more about his work today. But this episode is so immensely important in the context of blood pressure and brain hemorrhages, because our sleep is the bedrock to our health. And the better we can manage our sleep, the more that is going to help us both psychologically and physiologically too. Today's episode is so immensely interesting because we will hear more about what happens to our body when we get good sleep, what happens to our body when we don't get enough sleep, what are the biggest disruptors of our sleep, and how do we overcome them. Dave provides not only more information to arm you to better manage your sleep, but also really simple, tangible actions that you can use to support your sleep and therefore your health too. Ultimately, that is what this podcast is about. To help you draw the dots between your daily actions and how that is affecting your health, both short-term and long-term. If you enjoy today's episode, please make sure to click subscribe and also to share it with anyone who you think that this would benefit to. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the more people who listen to this podcast, who are provided with more information and education around how best to manage their blood pressure, ultimately, the more people we can support to potentially prevent preventable brain hemorrhages from happening. So, without further ado, let's dive into the episode. I'm so excited to have you on the episode today for the Prevent the Preventable podcast. And welcome, and thank you very much for being here. Now, this is an incredibly exciting episode, I think, for me personally, because, you know, as I've already mentioned to you, that I believe that sleep is so fundamentally important to our health, yet I don't think we talk about it enough. You know, we all talk about maybe our diet, our exercise, but how much are we actually making sleep a priority? And I think, you know, when I personally get my sleep right, you know, it has a knock-on effect on all the other areas of my life, whether that's exercise, how happy I am, what I choose to eat, etc. So there's this beautiful benefit that we get from having good sleep. And I think it's important to recognize that. I think it's important to understand that. But equally from our perspective, when we're thinking about blood pressure, particularly in this podcast, and therefore how sleep affects your blood pressure, and thereafter how your blood pressure potentially by having normal blood pressure could help prevent brain hemorrhages. And that's what we're talking about in this podcast. So we'll talk about all of that today. But firstly, why are we talking to you? Who are you? And what do you do in the world of sleep?
Great. Well, thanks, Fiona, for that introduction. And so I'm clinical director at a company called Sleep Unlimited, and we tend to do all things sleepy. A lot of my work's training health professionals to help other people sleep better with the clients that they work with. But a lot of my clinical work's with people who've had significant brain injury, and a bunch of them have had stroke or other cerebrovascular events like hemorrhages and traumatic brain injuries from accidents, things like that. So we do quite a lot of work in helping to improve the sleep quality of that sort of quite at-risk group of people, because we know that when they sleep better, their rehabilitation trajectory goes quicker and more effectively than if we don't deal with the sleep stuff. Like you've just said, their sleep doesn't get an awful lot of attention, but it's fundamental. If you're not sleeping well, then every other aspect of your life is impacted very negatively, psychologically, but also physiologically. And that's really, you're I think, interested in both aspects of that, but particularly the physiological side of things in terms of blood pressure. So lovely to be able to come along today and talk to you about that, and just explain to your viewers, your listeners, a little bit more about what's actually happening in terms of that relationship between sleep quality and our physical and mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much in that. And there's so many different points I want to kind of explore. There's probably two sides to almost even what you just mentioned in terms of sleep being important to the average person. I know there's no such thing as the average person, but somebody who's not been impacted by a brain hemorrhage or a brain injury or something, or any other traumatic injury. And then the people that have been, and you touched on there about how actually that improves their rehabilitation if you can get it right. And I'm really interested in exploring those two things. But firstly, in summary, can you explain why sleep is so important? What's actually happening when we sleep?
So there's this brain restoration is the sort of the current theory. There's different stages of sleep, and they do different things for us. I'm sure your listeners would have probably heard of REM sleep before, standing for rapid eye movement sleep. We also have non-rapid eye movement sleep. So we live our lives in health in three states of consciousness. We're either awake, sampling life during the day, usually, and then at night time, unless you're a night shift worker, we tend to be asleep during the night time, and we'll cycle between these two stages, REM and non-REM sleep. When we go into our deep non-REM sleep, this is all about memory consolidation. If you think about if you analogize your brain as it's like a busy office, and all these thoughts that occur to us all the time generates pieces of paper in our busy office. At the end of the day, that's full. And if you don't tidy up in sleep, the next day, more papers coming in, and we overload, and we're not functional. We're not happy. We get confused and disorientated. It impacts our physical health. We can maybe come back to that little bit later on. So that's why we need to do this sleep thing every night, just to tidy up to start with. So you get more of this deep non-REM in the early stages of the night to sort the paper out. I'm talking to you. You're going to pay me lots of money for talking to you today. Dream on. That's really important piece of paper. I need to send that invoice to you tomorrow. But I've had a thought about a Coke can I've just seen blowing down the high street. I don't need to remember that. So when we go into that deep stages of sleep, our brains go very quiet. But there's a central part of our brain called the hippocampus, which is really active. And that's really important for that memory consolidation. So you can sort of analogize that hippocampal activity when we're in the deep sleep, deep non-REM sleep. It's my secretary coming out and going, big invoice. You can't forget about that, Dave. Top of the in tray for tomorrow morning. Coke can, forget it. Now, if I get enough of that deep sleep, then I tidy up my office. I'm a happy, functional person. But if I don't, if something interferes with the length or the depth of my sleep, the quality of my sleep, then I don't tidy up so well. And that causes me dysfunction the next day. And the key feature of insomnia really is daytime dysfunction. And everyone knows what that feels like. Even the best sleepers in the world will have a bad night from time to time, and it just affects everything that we do. We're not functional, we're not happy, we're not safe at a psychological level. But then there are some things that happen to us physiologically as well, which will impact how we eat, like you mentioned earlier on, cortisol, stress hormones. And these can exacerbate the blood pressure issues that I'm sure we're going to come to talk about later on.
Yeah, it's almost like I see, it's like tidy desk in your office, tidy mind. And I think that's a really interesting way to talk about it. You mentioned there about depth and length of sleep, and therefore maybe quality. Is one more important than the other? Could you have better, is it more important to maybe have deeper sleep but shorter, or longer sleep that's not as deep? Does that matter?
Yeah, so you need both. You need to get the right amount of sleep for you, and that can vary. So some people are natural short sleepers, others more longer sleepers. And what we find, about 95% of human adults will sleep between 6 and 9 hours.
Yeah.
You might be a shorter sleeper, I might be a longer sleeper. Intuitively, everybody knows how much they need to get, and you have to get the right amount for you consistently. But if you're a younger person, babies, they might need 16 hours in a 24-hour period because there's so much learning going on. Yeah. And then as we go through childhood, that sleep requirement will drop away, and then we're 6 to 9 in healthy adults. If you've had some sort of brain injury, a hemorrhage or a stroke or a traumatic brain injury, whilst your brain's healing from that, you might need more sleep. So we'll often see that oversleeping happens in people who've had issues in their brain for whatever reason. And they might need more sleep in the immediate aftermath of that to help with the brain recovery. So we see more napping behaviors, longer sleep. But also you've got to get the quality of sleep. So anything which might knock you out of the deep sleep or out of the REM sleep leaves us in lighter sleep. And that's not very useful for us. We don't tidy up so well, and that causes us dysfunction. Now, that could be a brain injury, internal as a result of a hemorrhage, or external as a trauma from a road traffic accident or a fall or something like that. Or it could be external. I could just drink too much caffeine. That stimulates me and knocks me out of my deep sleep. Alcohol will do that. Stress will do that. So when we're looking at treating a sleep problem, we're trying to find out, well, what's intrinsic to the person? Can we manage that? Maybe we need some medication to help with reducing blood pressure, for example. But maybe there's behavioral things we can do. Stop drinking the caffeine later in the day. Don't eat or drink too close to bedtime so that you can get the depth, the quality of the sleep as well. So you need both. What is an obstacle that might be getting in the way? A stimulant drug like caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, or and what helps? So good routines and making sure that you get the right amount of sleep for you. So everybody's very different on that. And it's about doing a good diagnostic process with people. You know, what behavioral things are they doing that might help or hinder? Let's get rid of those obstacles and do things that help more. And let's make sure we're managing the physiological things as well. So that maybe blood pressure medication or pain medication, for example, or psychotherapy for people who might be anxious, depressed, or maybe sometimes antidepressant, anti-anxiolytic medications sometimes are indicated as well. So it's very important that we look at the individual in the round and we tailor interventions to that person, because everybody's different.
Yeah. And I think that's true of many things, isn't it? It's true of when somebody goes into therapy, when somebody is trying to navigate new exercise or whatever it is. I think there's also probably some common problems that come up, and we can talk about those as we go through the episode, and therefore probably kind of give a summary of what are some of the easy wins, let's say, that you can offer in terms of, well, if you try these things, then they might help. Then there might need to be more individual support thereafter. But if we just take a step back and you talk about these different stages of sleep, can you give us a bit of a summary about what these stages of sleep are and essentially what is happening to the brain, to the body in those different stages?
Yeah. So your body's pretty much doing what it'll do anyway. You'll still digest your food. You'll still make urine when you're awake or if you're asleep. So it's not so much body stuff. It's more brain, although there are hormonal changes which do affect the body. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. We talked about the non-REM, the deep sleep that we do more early in the night, tidying up the office. That's really important for us. If I deprive you of your sleep for a few days, you'll hate me. So
I might hate you if you deprive me for one night, to be honest. I love my sleep.
It's a really useful form of torture or interview technique if you work for the CIA. All right, we won't go there. And then if I leave you alone, you'll do more deep non-REM sleep in your sort of recovery phase, because it's so important for us to do that office tidying bit. But we'll cycle out of that and we'll come, instead of waking up, we go into REM sleep. Now, when you're in REM, a different part of your brain's really quite active. In deep non-REM, that hippocampus is really active, doing the tidying up bit, but the rest of the brain's gone quite quiet. But when we're in REM, your limbic system's really active, which is your cortex is on the top doing the higher level thinking stuff. That goes quiet when we're asleep. We're not processing what we're seeing in the environment anymore. But just underneath that is your limbic system. Your amygdala is part of that. You may well have heard of that. Some of your listeners.
So for people who might not know these terms, what do they mean?
So your limbic system, your amygdala, is a bits of the brain that are just underneath your cortex, and they're associated with emotional memory. And that is why our REM dreams they're really weird. They're really scary. They're really violent. They're really erotic. They're more than I experience when my rational cortex is switched on. So some people can fly in their dreams. We'll try and fly right now. Oh, stop, very dangerous. You don't want to be climbing up on your roof and trying to fly right now. But in your dreams, you can do that. I can run around naked outside. I can scream at my boss. I can have wild sex with Angelina Jolie safely in my dreams, but I won't do that stuff when I'm awake because I'll get arrested and I'll get fired. So this is a little bit Freudian, this is sort of concept of emotional reprocessing. Stressful things happen to us in the day, and that's what we think the REM sleep's about. It's about trying to dissipate that stress. So we do the deep non-REM to tidy up and organize, and we do the REM to vent and sort of depotentiate the stresses of the day, and you need both at a psychological level. And that's what we tend to see in the short term. Sleep deprivation, the impact of it tends to be more psychological. We're not happy, we're confused, leads to anxiety and depression and things like that. But when we're sleep deprived, hormonal changes happen, and that's really quite significant in terms of blood pressure.
Is that over is that over a short period, or is that over a long period? So if someone's sleep deprived for a week, would those hormonal changes happen then, or is it more over a long term?
So it happens straight away. And if you recover straight away and you get your sleep back and you have a transient insomnia, which only lasts for a day or two, you're not going to notice so much physical long-term. It's when it becomes chronic that the long-term physical health consequences will come in. So if you look at groups of people who constantly mess around with their sleep, and a really good example, that's shift workers, constantly changing their routine, their sleep's messed up over a really long period of time. We see so if you do shift work, rapid rotational shifts that are antisocial, they go round the clock, you're doing night shifts and day shifts, and you do that for 25 years or more, you die 10 years younger than people who don't do shift work on average. And it's all the nasty stuff. It's a range of different cancers, particularly breast and colorectal cancers, hypertension, diabetes, metabolic syndrome more generally, COPD. It knocks into these physical health consequences over time. So in the short term, if we deprive you of your sleep for just half a night, in the morning, your cortisol levels, the stress hormone, will be elevated, which raises your blood pressure.
Yeah.
Now, if you then get your good sleep back the next night, well, that's a short-term insult, probably not going to do too much damage to you. But you do that for 25 years or more, it leads on to these increased incidence of COPD, cerebrovascular events like hemorrhage.
Is that because it's causing some damage to those vessels in the brain, which potentially could lead to a bleed?
So that's hypertension. Yeah, and the blood vessels in our brains are really tiny, so they're much more susceptible to high blood pressure, and that's why we see people with chronic long-term hypertension much more at risk for having strokes and hemorrhages, because those vessels in the brain are so delicate. They're the ones that will kind of suffer the most from high blood pressure, and cortisol is a driver of that. That's the cortisol story. When you're sleep deprived, we have a couple of hormones that regulate our glucose metabolism in our body. One's called leptin and one's called ghrelin. When you're sleep deprived, so one of them makes you feel full up and one of them makes you feel hungry. And when you're sleep deprived, the one that makes you full up goes down and the one that makes you feel hungry goes up. So anyone who's done a night shift before, and you've been awake for 18 hours, there's nothing like 4 o'clock in the morning. You hit that dip and whack. And the only real solution is to go and eat your way through it. Find the fridge and eat the bad stuff. Because your brain is saying, we're in some sort of crisis here. I've not slept for 18 hours, not sure why. This is driven by your brainstem. It's not thinking about it. It's just, we're in some sort of crisis. Why are we not sleeping? Get some sugar in, eat the carbs, get to a place of safety and sleep, whatever you do. So your brainstem is saying, eat the sugar, eat the sugar, eat the sugar, because those hormones have gone out of balance as a result of the sleep deprivation. Yeah, your cortex will be saying, oh, no, I'm on a diet. No, I'm not going to eat the sugar. But your brainstem's just saying, eat the sugar, eat the sugar, eat the sugar. And you will not feel right until you've eaten that sugar. And that's
Your
driven
emotional
your
brain
brain
versus your logical brain at that point.
Oh,
I imagine.
absolutely. The animal instinct from here will override the intellect every time. And that's why chronic long-term night shift workers will eat bad things. They will crave them at a neurobiological level, not at a conscious level.
Yeah.
And they will be naturally attracted to the fatty, sugary things to get that energy, to get to a place of safety, to then get the sleep that we need. And that's why chronic long-term shift workers will gain weight, because they're not metabolizing their glucose effectively. And that's why we see increased incidence of obesity. And of course, that is a massive driver for hypertension. So you've got a double whammy effect going on here. In fact, it's a triple. I'm not tidying up. I'm not emotionally reprocessing in the REM. So that affects my mood. My cortisol levels go up, which makes me more stressed, which pushes my blood pressure up in the short term. But if that's chronic, that's all the time, stressed all the time, high blood pressure all the time, and the glucose hormones are out of balance as well. So you've got a triple whammy effect. I'm just craving the bad stuff. My stress hormones are up and my mood is down. And when people get upset and fed up, quite a lot of comfort eating, it makes us feel good. I'm craving that sugar anyway. So that's what I do. And then I gain weight, and that leads to more hypertension in the more longer term. And that's why we see chronic long-term shift workers really struggling with obesity, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, which knocks into cancers, COPD, high blood pressure, cerebrovascular events like strokes. And if you're predisposed to having an aneurysm or some sort of ischemic event in the brain, then and we know that there is genetic susceptibility to that. You layer that up with these lifestyle factors as well, much more at risk for then having a stroke or an aneurysm or a hemorrhage.
Yeah, no, quite. And I think that's the point of the podcast, is that, blood pressure is not the only cause of a brain hemorrhage. We know that there are many different causes, but blood pressure is one of the most modifiable and one of the leading causes that is due to lifestyle. And therefore, if we can better understand that and adopt a better understanding of not only blood pressure, but how our lifestyle contributes to high blood pressure, then we can mitigate a huge number of cases of brain hemorrhages happening. To your point, somebody could have a abnormality in a blood vessel or a weakness in a blood vessel, an aneurysm. But if we are able to manage lifestyle factors, you're not necessarily going to completely, you could still have a brain hemorrhage, but you'll mitigate a huge
the risk
your
that is posed
propensity or
by
your
your lifestyle.
likelihood might be mitigated. Like you say, that might bring that down. If we can do things which are maybe more psychobehavioral around that, making sure that we do something about sleep. So I metabolize my glucose better, my cortisol levels aren't up, my mood is better, so I'm less likely to eat the bad stuff. That will all potentially ameliorate, mitigate against those things from happening. So there are lifestyle factors that we can do. And people will say, oh, eat better and exercise more. But if you're tired, it's really hard to do that. I'm not motivated to go run around in the park because I'm tired and fed up. I'm not motivated, and my brainstem's saying eat the sugar. So that makes it really hard. So actually, you've got to get the sleep stuff right to then enable all that other stuff to happen more effectively.
Yeah, absolutely.
A huge thank you to Colony Coworking for supporting us with this first series of the Prevent the Preventable podcast, and for providing us with this beautiful studio too. Now, at the Natalie Kate Moss Trust, we are a small team working remotely, but on a mission to make a big difference. But finding the balance between flexible working and working in inspiring spaces surrounded by inspiring people can be a hard balance to strike sometimes. Colony is an expanding network of co-working spaces in Manchester, a place for entrepreneurs, creatives, freelancers, startups, and established businesses. A place where everyone comes together, where ideas pollinate and businesses flourish. And Colony is helping NKMT do just that by supporting us with this podcast, by helping us reach more people with this vital message, and ultimately helping us to prevent the preventable. To find out more about how Colony can help your business grow, head to the show notes now. There's two things here that I find really interesting. Well, probably two questions that I have. The first one being, what if somebody is super disciplined and they listen to this and they are a shift worker and they're like, okay, well, I understand that I'll have cravings, but I can resist those and I can manage that. Does the rest of the what you mentioned about the cortisol and the REM sleep, etc., can they mitigate some of those effects to a degree? And then I guess the second point is, obviously we don't necessarily want to scare, I guess, in many ways, those people who are, well, I am a shift worker and I will be a shift worker because I am a nurse or a doctor or a firefighter or whatever it may be. And that's my job and that's my life. And I love my job and I'm not going to change it. So I guess the question around that is, if they then, really make sure that their sleep is great when they are able to sleep, even if that's in the daytime, do they then mitigate some of those risk factors, even if it's not a normal circadian rhythm of working through, sleeping through the night and working in the day?
Yeah. So yes and no. If you are messing around, like you just mentioned there, your circadian rhythm, if you're messing around with that, and we've just done it, we've just changed the clocks. At the time of this recording last week, the clocks have just changed and it messes everybody up. And we see an increased incidence of cerebrovascular events, heart attacks in the weeks following the clock change because of the change in routine. Now, shift workers are doing that all the time. They're going to have that insult all the time. But they can mitigate against that by lifestyle factors, by optimizing their sleep, taking longer breaks between shifts if they can to readapt to the new routine. But that will always be an insult that's going to be there, and they will put themselves more at risk from doing that. Now, we do a lot of work with shift workers, the shift workers themselves, but also organizations that shift people, and try and make that less of an insult for their workforce. So we try and encourage people to select permanent early shifts and not do permanent earlies or permanent lates or permanent nights, because then you're not shifting so much, and allowing the workforce to do that. Or reduce the rate of rotation. So they don't rotate every 2 weeks, they rotate every 2 months. And allowing more space in between the shift changes for people to adapt to the new sort of effectively, it's social jet lag shift work, adapting to a new time zone. It's like you're flying to Costa Rica and back every 2 weeks, and everyone knows what the jet lag feels like. Well, it's exactly the same with the shift worker with that routine. So we want to try and reduce that insult, but also enable at the worker level strategies for them to manage their sleep better, to optimize the sleep that they're going to get, so that then they don't suffer so much around those shift changes.
Yeah,
So we've got to take a two-pronged attack.
And so,
really.
So to the first question around if somebody was able to manage, they will do a night shift, but then they still get 9 hours sleep during the day. Does that matter if they, to your point, if they did that for 2 months and that it's always the same rhythm, that's okay? Or
it's so long as they're getting the right amount of sleep for them. And you say 9 hours, well, that would be at the longer end. A lot of people who do shift work, about a third of people, they start it and they think, I hate this. They probably tend to be the longer sleepers because they need more and the changes interfere more. The people who deal with shift work better, they're probably the shorter sleepers because they don't need so much in that 24-hour period. So if you're getting the right amount of sleep for you, your routine's fairly consistent, you adapt effectively between shift changes, you should be absolutely fine. It's getting the right amount for you consistently is the really important thing. And making sure that it's of good quality as well, that you get the depth tidy up, you get the REM emotionally reprocessed. So it is about the length and the quality that's individually appropriate. If you do that in the night and the day, we haven't really talked about this yet. But we are diurnal beings. We're not nocturnal. We're supposed to be asleep at night and awake during the day, and we get a big signal from the sunshine. And that helps our brains make melatonin, which is sleep promoting. And if you are a permanent night shift worker and you never see that yellow thing up there, you lose a lot of that signal. And melatonin has lots of impact across our systems. It helps with our sleep, sure, but it also helps with our mood. There's research going on right now which suggests that it might be sort of anti-carcinogenic, having lots of melatonin. So we don't fully understand the impact of melatonin on our metabolisms yet. There's still a lot of research going on there, but we know it's really fundamental for sleep and mood. And if you're not seeing that sun and getting that signal, that is going to hurt you. So night shifts are not great, really, especially permanent nights. People who do permanent nights really do struggle with sleep, mood, and
I imagine there's
you talk about melatonin, and I imagine, obviously you're not getting your vitamin D, but also you're probably not going to be socializing in certain ways, which again will have, obviously this is me assuming, but you're not going to be getting the benefits of that. And when you hear studies of like the blue zones in the world, a big part of that is around the sun, is around social interactions, is around balance, etc. So if you are working through the night and not getting any of those benefits, I imagine you know, we're talking about the direct correlation of the increase of cortisol, you know, the changes in leptin, etc., when you're deprived of sleep. But also, you know, there's all these other things which maybe we're not talking about as in a direct factor, but will have an influence on your health, and presumably factors such as, you know, some of the conditions that you spoke about before, whether that's blood pressure or otherwise. And I think it's very, very interesting to kind of think about those correlations too. I think one thing I'm interested in as well is, you know, there are big shifts in our society. You know, we have in many ways over the last 100 to 200 years moved away from, you know, how we were designed as Homo sapiens. And you know, you're right, you know, sleeping at night, being awake in the day, you know, and following that natural rhythm. And I think there's many things that have shifted in terms of our society and our culture and industries as well, that have meant a lot more people are not following that rhythm. And I would assume, and I may be wrong, but I would assume there would be a rise in health problems that have occurred as a result of that shift. Can you talk to that at all? Would that be true and fair to say?
Sure. Well, I mean, the advent of the electric light bulb, big change. Now we can be up at night working, and we now see the pressure of the 24/7 society lifestyle, which wasn't there before the light bulb came along, really. And we went to bed when it got dark because we don't function well in the dark. And we got up and did stuff in the day when we could see what we were doing. And that natural evolved experience, if you like, has been going on in us for 100,000 years. And that change that we saw with the light bulb, what, I don't know, 100 years ago, say, when it became sort of ubiquitous, and the sort of advent of shift work coming along in the sort of a post-war period in the developed world. In terms of our evolution, that's a blink of an eye. We've not evolved to deal with that effectively yet. That will take generations for us to adapt to, and we're not adapting to that yet. And that's why we see an increased incidence of all these sorts of things, because we're putting ourselves into that situation. Jet lag's a good example. We didn't get jet lag until we had jets. You went on a boat to Australia, it took 6 weeks to get there. You gradually shifted over those 6 weeks on the boat. Now, if I pick you up and fly you to Brisbane now, you can get there in 17 hours and whack. Oh, it's all upside down. It's the middle of the night, but it's the daytime. It's really confusing for us. And there's no way we've got any sort of biological adaptation to that right now. It will take centuries, generations of genetic evolution for us to adapt to that sort of thing. So modern life we're just not ready for it. It's moving too quickly for us. And that was your industrial revolution. And now we've got the technological revolution, and we spend more time sat in front of these things.
Yeah.
And that's in the last 20 years. So we've not adapted to the light bulb yet. We've certainly not adapted to these things. And we're seeing a huge issue with these. The exposure to blue light, which interferes with our melatonin secretion rhythms, particularly. And if you're looking at these, particularly late at night, you're stimulating your brain. You're not relaxing your brain. Whereas the cave person, it got dark, sun went down, we get a red shift, a red sky at night, that reddy orangey shift, sat round campfires, reddy orangey again. That orange light tells us it's nighttime, evening time, we'll be sleeping soon. These things emit light at the blue end of the spectrum, which is what we get out of the sky in the mornings. So you look at these at night, you're telling your brain it's the morning, not the evening. And that's messing us up hugely. Some frightening research coming out about the impact of blue light on our mental health and our physical health because of the impact on sleep, but also psychologically. And we're really concerned with children. We're getting a whole generation of kids now who are coming through, and there's been some research done on light versus heavy users of screens. Less than 2 hours a day compared to more than 6 hours a day. And the health, mental and physical health outcomes between those two groups are massive and frightening.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not supposed to be Zooming. I'm supposed to be farming. I'm supposed to be out there running around. Someone the other day, I really thought about this. When was the last time you saw a child with a plaster cast on their arm? We went out and fell out of trees and broke our arms, and we were outdoors running around. And you just don't see kids with plaster casts anymore because they're indoors on these. And these are causing big psychological damage to our next generation. And there's an impact on eyesight and stress myopia as well, because we're not looking out. So there's loads of stuff, and we're just starting to really clock how toxic these things are and how
Is there a
aberrant this sort of
solution?
lifestyle is for us. We're supposed to be running around out there.
Is there a solution? Because I think, with something like this, yes, we on an individual level, of course, we can all go, okay, well, I'll have, limitations on the times I spend on technology. Realistically, I think we all know, what is good for us. I think we all know that, sitting in front of a computer for 8 hours a day isn't particularly great for us. And equally, sitting on our phones and sitting, especially late at night, to your point, it's not great for us. I think it requires a lot of, work from an individual, let's say, to avoid the dopamine hits that you'll get from scrolling. So my gut feeling is more needs to be done on a higher level. And I wonder if you have any thoughts working in this industry, is if like what can be done?
Well, we need to do the research. The research is early days, but it's fairly unequivocal. We know these things aren't great for us and we should be more outside. And we kind of know that now. So the next step is educating people. I think, we need to do more work in schools. A lot of schools now are clocking this and saying, right, you submit your phone at the start of the day. They get stuck in a box and you get it back at the end of the day. So when the kids are at school, they're not on their phones all the time. I think we need to do more in school with children. Maybe there's policy as well at a Department of Education level, perhaps, that phones are limited a little bit, but we've got to work with parents as well. And so, let's think about other things that we can do with our kids rather than relying on the screens to keep them occupied. As time goes on, we'll get more and more data, and all the data is showing us that it's essentially the longer you spend on these, the less happy you're going to be, the less physically active you will be. We were talking earlier on about night shift workers and not seeing the sun, and we talk about a lost opportunity to get exposure to natural daylight, a lost opportunity to go and fall out of a tree, if you're spending loads of time on these. So the data is very unequivocal at the moment, but we're going to get more of it, and that will inspire interventions and strategies and policies maybe that encourage people away from the phones. But at the moment, the doom scrolling, the dopamine hit, it's quite powerful, it's quite addictive. And I think societally, we're quite hooked on these things, and we're seeing a shift in mental health status in the wrong direction. And a lot of that's linked to sleep. We see a lot of problems with sleep associated with the screen use. And it's partly the blue light that you get from these that fools your brain into thinking it's the morning time. But it's also what you see in the light. I'm excited because I'm getting that dopamine hit, or someone says something nasty about you on Facebook at 10:30 at night, and it winds you up and you don't sleep, or you get an email from your boss and I've got all that to do tomorrow, and it just gets your brain going and then you don't sleep. So there's physiological things there with the blue light and the melatonin, but there's also psychosocial issues as well around what's in the light and how stimulating that is for us. It's early days. This research only really began, there's a seminal study done by a guy called Paul Greengrass from UCL in 2015, was the first big study to suggest that blue light's really impactive on sleep, and then the potential consequences of it. And that's been repeated many times since now. So the evidence is strong and growing.
Yeah, and I think one of the episodes that we have, which is early on in the series, is with one of our trustees, actually, a gentleman called Dr. Adam Greenstein, and he is an expert in hypertension, and he is particularly worried about children and the development of obesity, particularly, but also and therefore how common it is for younger people to be getting more blood pressure as a result of lifestyle. And I think this is a major problem, that I think children, to your point, are not running around, they're not expending energy in the same way. They're not interacting in the same way. They're just kind of sat by themselves. And as you say, kind of reacting to negativity, or even just looking at other people's lives and feeling that they're not, good enough. I think there's a major problem around mental health and the contributing factors that has on their health. And, you could even argue that maybe that, when they're worried, they don't sleep as well, let alone the other things about blue light, etc. So, when we spoke earlier about the blue zones as well, it's all of these different things are a bit of a mixing pot as well. And I think it is a major problem as well. A huge thank you to Hugh James Solicitors for sponsoring this first series of the Prevent the Preventable podcast. Now, having your life torn apart by a brain hemorrhage is one thing, but learning that it could have been prevented and it was due to a mistake in your medical treatment is truly devastating. And whilst nothing can change what has happened, Hugh James's clinical negligence team can support those who have suffered a brain injury or bereavement due to a mistake in their treatment. To find out more about how and if they can support you, head to our show notes now. Let's shift slightly and kind of actually return to your point around the work that you do with people who have had brain injuries or, or strokes or brain hemorrhages or whatnot. And you mentioned as well that those people, you work with them in terms of supporting their sleep because a natural effect that could have a benefit on their rehabilitation. How would it benefit their rehabilitation in terms of getting presumably, better quality sleep, deeper and longer sleep, as you mentioned before?
So we deliver, if you like, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI. So there's lots of different variants of CBT. I'm sure you listeners will have come across cognitive behavioral therapy before, and it developed in the 60s for managing anxiety and depression. But we've got lots of other variants of it now: CBT for psychosis, CBT for eating disorders, CBT for insomnia. That's me. That's what we do here. We train health professionals to deliver that, but we'll also assess and treat people who have had significant injuries, and we deliver CBTI for them. That's my book's all about that, and how we assess and treat people using cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. It's tapping into core brainstem stuff, optimizing the sleep cycles, making sure we get rid of things which might knock us out of REM, making sure we get enough sleep. And it seems to work for about 70% of people who engage with it. So it's a really effective set of interventions, and they're non-drug. There are lots of things that we've talked about already. Put in everything sleep likes. Don't mess around with your routine. Go and get exposure to natural daylight. Be physically and mentally active. Put the things in that sleep likes, and then get rid of the obstacles. Caffeine, psychological stress. What are those obstacles? Now, if you do that effectively, it doesn't really matter who you are. You could be 3 years old with cerebral palsy, pervasive developmental delay, just had an aneurysm, a stroke, be living with dementia, be perimenopausal, have neurodiversity. Doesn't really matter. All of those things come on top of the brainstem, which is where your sleep is controlled. It's animal brain stuff. So we see a 70% level of effectiveness with CBT for insomnia with everybody, even really at-risk people who've got all sorts of other things going on. So that's what we do with the folk who we work with who've had significant issues with their brain, be it a stroke, an aneurysm, hemorrhage, or traumatic brain injury. Now, if we can optimize that sleep, then the stress hormones go down. They're more tidy office, they're more engaged, they've got more energy to engage, they're less depressed, they're less anxious, they eat better, they lose weight or maintain their weight at a healthy rate, and that just helps enable that rehabilitation trajectory. People don't rehab well in hospitals. They're not good places for sleep. We know people get much better much more quickly when we send them home and they're sleeping in their own bed. So as soon as it's safe to do so, we want to discharge people from hospital, get them home, and then when they start sleeping better, they rehab more quickly. And that's quite well established, really. So that's what we're looking to do, is to put in all the things that sleep likes, identify the obstacles and get rid of them. And then you've got a 7 out of 10 chance of sleeping better, and all the knock-on effects that will have for all of us. We see less hyperactivity in people with neurodiversity. We see less sleep disturbance and invasive, unpleasant perimenopausal symptoms. We see people rehabilitating from a brain injury more quickly. We see dementia progressing more slowly if we do stuff around the sleep. So it really is fundamental for all of us.
So, and I think that that's fascinating. And I think it's almost, especially when somebody is suffering with some sort of neurological problem, it's something that's very accessible. It's not something that, out of reach or super expensive. We can all have access to good sleep. And it's really exciting to hear that you talking about that, rehabilitation is possible if we can get things that are quite fundamental really to our health, and if we can get them right as well, it can really support us. It might not solve everything, I'm sure you'll probably say that, but it will really help us.
I've seen some radical changes, and people who've been written off, you'll never work again, you'll never walk again.
Wow.
And actually those people have recovered really well. If we do. So rehab is always possible. We can always do something better. I'm sure of that. But a lot of people sometimes get a bit written off. But I've seen radical changes in some people who have been written off, and then they do get to go back to work and walk again and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, there's absolutely tractable. These things can be shifted. And it's not particularly tricky stuff, which I think is why we see that 70% effectiveness level. It's fairly straightforward stuff to do that isn't too difficult to adhere to. And it's just tapping into those core biological processes that are working in all of us. And I think that's why it's so effective for everybody that we've tried it with. We haven't found any group of people where CBTI doesn't work. If they comply with it, it works. We might adapt it a little bit. We do certain things differently with children or people who are particularly at risk, but it's the same core stuff and it works really effectively. And the outcomes can sometimes be profound.
Yeah. And that's really, as I said before, really exciting as well. And I think especially to this brain hemorrhage community, I know there's a lot of people who we are in contact with who have had a brain hemorrhage who, are struggling, emotionally because their life is very different and they're struggling to do X, Y, Z. And, to say before, it's not that necessarily this might solve everything, but there could be dramatic results, as you mentioned there as well.
A lot of helplessness as well. And if we can be reassuring, and I think a lot of this, what I do is reassuring people about this stuff. It's not difficult. If you stick to it, you've got a 7 out of 10 chance of getting better. Give it a try. That can be quite hopeful for people. And sometimes people can be obviously and understandably sometimes feel quite hopeless sometimes. And I think there is a lot of hope around this. And that can be really, really positive for someone at a psychological level. And that can help to motivate people and keep them engaged with services, with their rehab. And we do see some really sometimes quite profound results when we get people engaged with this. Yeah.
So I think, for a lot of people that might be listening to this, as an entirety in its episode will go, great. Well, I know, what, I actually know that sleep is important for me. I feel better when I sleep more. I don't feel great when I don't sleep well. Now I maybe understand why, but I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that, as I said before, they might, be working shift and they can't change that. And their shifts are all over the place. Or they might be a new mum or a new father. There's probably a number of different circumstances or lifestyles where it isn't conducive to good sleep. For those people, but also for people who maybe just do have a normal routine and, sleep in the night but maybe can't sleep. What are some of the key things that you can share with people? And I think we've touched on a number of them, but key things that you can share with people in terms of maybe easy wins or things that they can do to support themselves to make sure that, some of these physiological effects that we've spoken about, they're maybe not at risk of so much.
So I mentioned earlier, CBT for insomnia, doing 2 things: put in everything sleep likes, get rid of the obstacles. So in terms of what sleep likes, it loves a good routine. So shift workers are going to struggle with that. Okay, we might not be able to change that. So what else can we do? Let's try and do everything else. And for other people where we might struggle to do certain things, well, what can we do? If we can do all of it, great. But we can't with everybody. Sometimes we have to dial it back here and there. But good routine, sleep loves that. So that's the number one thing to do. Everyone know what the clock change does to us. And that's just an hour shift. So number one, get a good routine. Number 2, be outdoors and get the melatonin. And that really helps to promote the sleep. Melatonin similar in chemical structure to serotonin. So serotonergic depletion is associated with depression. So if you go outdoors and you've got a load of melatonin, your brain can make serotonin. So that boosts your mood. Plus, you'll also get vitamin D in your skin, which boosts your immune system. And fatigue like presentation. So long COVID's a really good example. MS, ME, had a guy with chronic ME, 15 years. And he came to us and he spends 3 hours outdoors in the mornings, and pretty much all of his ME symptoms have gone now just by going outside because of that melatonin, vitamin D, serotonin. His life's changed around. He said he's tried everything. And that was the one thing that shifted it for him, was just going outdoors for a bit in the morning times. So those things are quite easy to do. Put in everything sleep likes. Now, on the other side, and this is the obstacles bit, we've got in CBT for insomnia, we've got the 2-hour rule. So try not to do anything interfering to sleep, anything obstacly in the 2 hours before bed. So try and get off them in 2 hours before bed. Get rid of the blue light, turn the tellies off, the laptops. Make your environment more orangey in the evening, because that tells your brain it's nighttime, not it's daytime. So those, again, quite easy things to do. A massive one, and we see this all the time, you know, a good third of this audience almost certainly will be getting up in the night to use the bathroom. That's really common. So don't drink anything in the 2 hours before you go to bed. You empty your bladder before you go to bed, and then you're less likely to be woken up in the night to go to the bathroom. And I've seen that so many times. I'll give you so many examples of that. And that's really easy. Just stop it. CBT for insomnia, another reason why I think it's effective is it's not stop it, it's just change when you do it. Drink as much as you like in the daytime, Marjorie. I don't care. Just don't do it in the 2 hours before bed. You can look at that if you want to in the daytime, Marjorie. I don't care. Just not in the 2 hours before bed. Don't eat in the 2 hours before bed, because digesting your food will stimulate you, and that knocks you out of the deep and out of the REM. Don't get the good quality sleep. Nicotine is a stimulant. Try not to smoke in the 2 hours before bed. Alcohol interferes with the deep and the REM, so not too much alcohol, not in the 2 hours before bed. Exercise and hot baths. That's a really common one. A lot of people have heard that exercise and hot baths help you sleep, and they do. But not if you're doing it in the 2 hours before bed, because it raises your blood pressure, your heart rate, your body temperature, and you have to cool down. You'll notice this when you get tired, you get a bit chilly. We have a body temperature rhythm, which dips at bedtime. And that dip in body temperature is a sort of a signal for us to go and get cozy and get into our nests and sleep. Now, if you're too hot in your body because you've been running around or you've just had a hot bath, you'll struggle to get off to sleep. That's a really good example of some research that was done quite a while ago, that was done really well in the 1980s by a guy called Jim Horn out of Loughborough, sort of preeminent sleep guy in this country. He sort of sadly passed away a couple of years ago. I studied under him when I was doing my sleep stuff. It was a lucky place to be for me. He showed that exercise and hot baths are great for sleep. You get more deep sleep if you've had some exercise or had a hot bath, because that body temperature increase kind of cooks your brain a bit, and that means it's more tired, so you get better sleep afterwards. And the media hop onto that and say hot baths and exercise help you sleep, and they do. But then loads of people will come back from work and then they go to the gym, or then they have a hot bath late at night, and then that actually interferes with their sleep. So yeah, exercise and hot baths are great, just earlier in the day. Caffeine's a massive stimulant. That's a huge issue. We're seeing more and more of that.
How much caffeine should people drink?
Well, none. Don't take my drugs away from me, Dave. Yeah, that's a really tricky one. So we got this 2 hour rule for all those sorts of obstacles, but caffeine has a long half-life. It takes a long time for our bodies to eliminate it. So actually 4-6 hours before bed, at least, you want to get rid of the caffeine, preferably after lunch, actually. Okay, you want me to stop drinking coffee after lunch, Dave? Bye. And you lose people. So we say, right, well, when's your last cup of coffee? 6 p.m. Well, could you make it 5 for a week? And then 4, and then 3, and get people to grade back and just get rid of the caffeine later in the day. And that's a massive obstacle for sleep. And it's ubiquitous. It's on every street corner. The Monster cans, other caffeine drinks are available. Now, huge amounts of caffeine going in. People more and more tired. People mitigating that tiredness with caffeine. We saw a CEO a couple of months ago, went to see his GP. Really anxious. Why am I anxious? I'm not an anxious person. Why am I anxious? He was drinking 16 mugs of coffee a day.
Oh,
And the GP says,
wow.
you're a walking stroke, fella. You've got to stop doing this. And now he's got it back. He only drinks 6 cups now, all before lunch. It still feels like a lot. But there's a lot of modern lifestyle factors that get in the way, and caffeine is a big one. We're seeing more and more of that getting pushed on us. It's legal drugs, really. And a lot more of these things. So that there are certainly modern factors that are coming into play that are really problematic for sleep, but they're tractable. Now, if we educate people about that and they understand why caffeine's such a problem, why exercising and hot baths close to bed aren't helpful, because we need that body dip in temperature to help us get to sleep. If they know why, then they're more inclined to stop it or shift it earlier in the day. And we're really quite conscious of that. We're not telling you to stop doing what you're doing, Marjorie. We're just encouraging you to do it away from bedtime. So
Yeah.
if you put in everything sleep likes and identify the obstacles that are in your life that might be affecting sleep and shift them away from bedtime, 7 out of 10 chance of sleeping better, feeling better, having less high blood pressure, mood. I mean, all of it.
Yeah,
So it's really
absolutely.
simple stuff, actually.
And I think you're right, Dave, as well. It's sometimes it's step by step, because I think, if ever somebody was listening to this and I was like, right, wait a minute, I've got to now suddenly, my routine is that I eat late, I exercise late, I drink all this coffee, I love a glass of wine in the evening, etc. I'm at work all day on my computer, so my downtime is staring at my phone in the evening, or whatever it is. I've got to, turn into a nun and change my whole life, etc. And I think it's
Right. So
Yes,
you
obviously all those
describe a
things have
lifestyle there
benefits.
that's typical, common, and someone might go, I'm doing all of this. Ah. Right. So we always say with those folks, and there's loads of people out there like this, and don't beat yourself up. You didn't maybe know about this stuff, because not a lot of people do, even though it's quite straightforward and we've known about this stuff for years. It's not in the public consciousness. There's a lot of aggressive marketing out there, especially for things like caffeine, and it's put into all sorts of things. And then they panic, I'm doing all of the wrong stuff. So slowly, gently, be kind to yourself. What can you do now? What can you do next week, week after that? And then just grade these things in. And if someone's been struggling with their sleep for a long time, sometimes it's one thing. Anne from Edinburgh came on a training. We do a 2-day training course. We talked about the fluid intake at night on day one. And she's, oh, that's me. I've woken up 3 times a night for 15 years, every night. It's like, right, stop drinking the fluid. And she came to me at the start of the second day of our training and she said, I did that fluid restriction thing last night, Dave, and I didn't wake up once last night for the first time in 15 years. Sometimes you can flip someone with one thing overnight. With others, it's slow, it's gradual, it's working on meds, making sure that they're going in at the right sort of time, that the levels are right, that pain's being managed, psychotherapy is helping out with the stress, routine, the caffeine, it could be all of it. And that's the skill in terms of the diagnostics, the formulating, what's going on with that person. Where am I going to get an easy win? Are you going to be like Anne from Edinburgh and we can just flip you with that one thing? Or are we going to have to do the whole 9 yards and we're going to have to grade it in really gently over months? Everybody's different. So we spend a lot of time trying to work out what's going on with someone and where's my easy in? What can we do now, Marjorie, that's easy for you? And then what can we follow on with? And then we gradually shift her out of that. And as she sleeps a bit better, her mood lifts. She's got more energy. Then she's more inclined to engage with the trickier stuff. And then we stepwise kind of ratchet her out of the situation that she's in. So it's very much horses for courses.
A beautiful knock-on effect, positive knock-on effect then, I'm sure. So, there's so much that we have spoken about here, and I think it's really beneficial. To your point, if people understand more and they're more aware and they get more educated on why something's important, they're more likely to do it. So I've no doubt that all of this information is going to be incredibly helpful for everyone listening. And equally, just some of those small changes that you mentioned today around phones and exercise and alcohol and, not drinking in the evenings, etc., are really easy wins, I think, for people to take away. And that's kind of the point of this podcast. It's education, but it's also easy wins as well. So Dave, thank you so much for sharing all your expertise and your knowledge and supporting this podcast as well. And we close the podcast with a very quick sort of easy fire questions, so to speak. And the first one is, what is one non-negotiable for you in your routine, which I'm sure we'll probably understand here, but in terms of your routine, habits, life that you know is supporting your health in a positive way?
I try to get outside as much as I can. I'll spend days sat in front of these things delivering full days of training, but then when I'm not doing this, I'll try and get in my garden or go for a walk. I play cricket in the summer. Long game outside, not outside for 20 minutes, outside for 6 hours. So really trying to focus on that, because I think that's really important. Being physically active and getting off these things is huge.
Yeah. Great. If you could get more people to understand one thing, what would it be?
Well, it would be identify what issues you've got. So, I mean, wrote a book a few years ago, and if people, the quickest and easiest and cheapest way to sort out your sleep problem is probably to get hold of that and read it and treat yourself.
We'll link it in the bio as well.
Most people are pretty sensible, and they'll be able to go through that. There's assessment process in there. Just assess yourself and think, right, what am I doing? Educate yourself about why these things are important to do or not do, and then think, well, what can I implement? And then that we are struggling a lot more with our mental and physical health issues in this country. Modern lifestyle that is not set up really. We're not supposed to be Zooming, but that's what we're doing all the time. So having an awareness of that, and especially for the next generation, we're really quite concerned about the mental health status of our kids at the moment, with the pressures of modern life, especially around the tech. So I think that's a really important piece as well, to try and what we want to do is get people sleeping well when they're younger, so they graduate into older age with resilient sleep, because aging is a risk factor for poor sleep. Your brain doesn't work quite so well as you get older. So we want to get people young, proactive healthcare, get them doing the right stuff, go into schools and disseminate this stuff to them so that they go through their lives with good sleep. They're less likely to struggle as they get older, and they'll maintain their physical health and mental health better if they do that. So that's a big part of what we do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more, starting those good habits young. And so finally, do you have a motto for life? And if so, what is it?
Got me on the hoof now. I could be silly here. I've just been reading The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy to my youngest, which is Douglas Adams, who's I'm a real fan of. So yeah, you've really got to know where your towel is. Anyone who knows Douglas Adams will know that one. But no, I mean, motto for like just eating well, sleeping well, good routines, be outdoors. I mean, all of that stuff's good for a healthy lifestyle, but really good for your sleep. So
get the basics right.
Get the basics right. Yeah, and it's not hard. And don't agonize about it. And I think the other thing is be really careful about the advice that is put out there on the internet by the so-called influencer expert. Barack Obama talked about truth decay a few years ago, that the death of the expert. There's these armchair experts out there, and because they've got a million followers on social media, people listen to them, and we're getting some really stupid advice getting put out, which actually could be quite dangerous. So if you're going to take advice on anything, not just sleep, but anything, go to someone who knows what they're talking about. Don't listen to a pop star or a footballer, because they're not qualified, right? Go to someone, do your research and get to the source. Make sure that people are referencing what they say, and this book is fully referenced. If you don't believe what I'm saying in here, the references are there. You can go and chase that up for yourself.
Yeah.
So make sure that you're getting good advice from people who know what they're talking about, and don't be swayed too much by the social media, which again is really tricky for the kids because it's so dominant now. So that I think is a really important message as well.
Yeah, great.
David, thank you so much. I think this has been a great episode, really interesting and really factual and helpful, I think, which is the main point, as I said before. So we will link all the details about how people can find you, your book as well, as you've mentioned, in the show notes too. But for now, thank you very much.
Hey, nice to talk to you, Fiona, and thanks for inviting me. I hope that your listeners and viewers find it useful. And yeah, any questions, do give us a shout.
I really hope that you found today's episode helpful and have taken away even just one thing that you can change to better support your sleep and thereafter your health too. To find out more information about Dave's work and also the book that he mentioned, you can find all the links in the show notes. And over the last few weeks, we have loved seeing you guys share the podcast on your socials. So please do continue to do that and make sure to tag us so that we can see your posts and stories too. And as I mentioned right at the beginning, please do click subscribe and share this episode with anyone who you feel it would support, because the more people who can listen to the information in these podcasts, the more people we can support in terms of better managing their blood pressure and potentially preventable brain hemorrhages from happening. Thank you again so much for listening today, and we will see you next week. Have a lovely day.